Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Islam Through the Ages. This is the third episode. This is, of course, with Dr. Stef Keris and myself, Daniel Raza. Dr. Stef, Assalamu alaikum, first of all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Last episode, we talked about North Africa, the spread of Islam through North Africa, the opening of Egypt. We talked about the third caliph, Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and his 12-year, 12-year reign, can we say?
That's correct.
12-year reign. And obviously, Islam moving into Morocco as well. And we talked about a divide as well. We talked about the fourth caliph, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who ruled over mostly Iraq and Persia. And then we talked about the fifth, Muawiyah. So that is more or less where we ended last time. And today we're going to be talking to you about the spread of Islam through Europe. And in many ways, for a lot of people, a forgotten empire as well we talk about. So we're talking about Spain. We're going to be talking a little bit about Cordoba and, of course, Sicily as well. A lot of Mediterranean islands.
That's right. Very, very correct. I mean, it is actually my favorite part of Islamic history, I must say, simply because, of course, we are living in Europe. We are part of Europe. And as I always make clear for people to know in my lectures also, we have to understand that Islam, from the very beginning, actually, was part of Europe as well. And this is something that politicians and certain category of people do not want to see at all. They see Islam and the Muslims as a foreign body in European society. Of course, a body that came later to Christian society. Christianity was as a denomination, as a system was there before Islam. Yes, that's true. But from the very beginning of Islam, as we saw, from the very first 100 years, not even 100 years, actually, Islam became part of Europe as well. And we will talk and go into depth, inshallah, and speak about Al-Andalus, which again was not only Spain, but Portugal as well. The Iberian Peninsula, as this part of the world is called. So Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal became the first independent European nation 150 years before, 150 to 200 years before Spain became an own independent nation, and the Muslims, Granada fell, the last bastion of Islam. And that pushed the Spaniards as well as the Portuguese, or first the Portuguese and then the Spaniards, to become one of the biggest colonial powers in the world, and especially going out to America and Africa and colonizing half the known world at that time. The biggest Portuguese-speaking country in the world is not Portugal, but Brazil. For that reason, there are more than 150 million Brazilians in the world, and there are just 10 million Portuguese. So if you compare this one, 15 times more living, Portuguese speakers in America than in the homeland, in Lisbon, in Portugal. So all this because of that, because of the spread of by the way, the compass was invented by the Muslims. And without the compass, they would have never ended up in America. Christopher Columbus, by the way, on his way to America, it's known nowadays that he had Muslims on his side to guide him to go to America. That's known. That's a known fact. That's a known fact, absolutely. And together with actually the first boat that arrived in America, which was the first European ship that arrived in America, had also Muslims on board. So Islam came with him to America as well. But again, it's not known. And it's on purpose, of course, not known and just forgotten. You mentioned it right. A book that I've written actually about the Ottoman Empire is called The Hidden Ottoman Heritage in Europe. And it is something hidden or forgotten even on purpose even, just left aside basically because it's not that important, is it, to some people?
In fact, as well, in Cordoba, there's an area, there's a building which I believe a lot of the people call it the church, the cathedral.
The cathedral, yes.
But a lot of the locals still call it the mosque.
That's right. Well, the whole of nowadays the southern region of Spain is called Andalusia, actually in Spanish, Andalusia. And that comes from the time being called Al-Andalus. But it was not that region, it was the whole of the Iberian Peninsula. But they on purpose, the Spaniards moved on and called the region of Andalusia, because that very region still until nowadays has, in cities like Cordoba, Seville, Granada, there's so much Islamic element still. There are so many Muslim monuments and buildings still from that time. That is incredible, actually. And the Spaniards are smart enough, I have to give it to them, mashallah. I'm happy that they do that. They do make use of it business-wise. They do invite tourists to come and see the 700 years of what the Muslims have left behind, the Muslim heritage. So they're smart enough, whereas other people, like we will see Sicily later, or Crete, or Rhodes in Greece, for example, they're doing exactly the opposite. They're trying to hide their 500 years in Greece of being a part of the Ottoman Empire. Sicily, 150 years of being part of the Muslim world. They're not only hiding it, but there's nothing to see anymore. So, whereas the Spaniards, alhamdulillah, the Portuguese, again, because they became earlier independent, kind of, they got rid of a lot of their Islamic heritage as well. But again, a devastating earthquake, we must admit that, in Lisbon, destroyed a lot in the surrounding in Portugal. So it was not something that it was just a barbaric act by the Europeans, but it happened naturally. Unfortunately, we're talking about hundreds of years now later.
Would you say there wasn't much of an attempt to revive it, would you say, or?
Yes, I clearly would say that none of the Europeans, including the Spaniards, until recently, until 20, 30 years ago, none of the Spaniards would actually, they would get upset if you told them you have some kind of Muslim legacy there in your country. And they would really clearly get upset. I remember when I was studying at the university in Germany, I did one of my subjects was Spanish literature and Spanish language. And my professor came from the south of Spain. And he would always say, Valcárcel is name, mashallah, and it was really great. I really liked him because he would always admit, he was a Christian Spaniard, and he would always admit that there was a connection between Spain as his home country and the Muslim Arab world, because he would see the connection. He would, as a professor, also understand. He would also know the history. But that was 20, 30 years ago, mashallah, and that's when they started also opening more and more, also tourism in Spain, of course, because until Franco time, 1975, there was not a lot happening in Spain from the point of tourism. So after the 80s, actually, on, things developed. Portugal, of course, is a different story. Portugal plays a little bit, the Portuguese played a little bit like the Greeks do, try to ignore Islamic history. Let's not talk too much about it. Mosques get converted into churches. Many people are not aware of that. If you go to Spain nowadays, you will find quite some churches which look like churches, but they used to be mosques before. So, yeah, well, that's how the Portuguese played. But on the other hand, we have to give them this, that Lisbon has a very big Islamic center. The capital of Portugal has still a very big Islamic center, not a center which is old, like from the time, of course, it's a new, modern one, and it takes care of the modern immigrants, especially the Africans who are nowadays from the former colonies. Portugal had 5 colonies, 5 countries in Africa used to be part of the Portuguese Empire. So many of them were Muslims, and they're living nowadays in Portugal, many of them. So, but we also have Portuguese Muslims, mashallah, and we have Spanish Muslims nowadays, even more so. Spanish people who come back to their roots and say, listen, they discover in their ancestry, they find out that we used to have Muslim great-great-great-grandparents, and now suddenly, why is this taken away from me? So there is some revival in Spain, I would say, of the Spaniards accepting Islam. I wouldn't say en masse. It's not something that is a massive wave going on. No, but there are Spaniards who have accepted Islam more than in Greece or in Portugal, and there are several. 2 or 3, as far as I know, Muslim parties even in the south of Spain, which are trying to gain, as Spanish people, Spanish citizens, they're trying to gain to play a role in Muslim in Spanish politics, especially in Andalusia, as we said, in the south of Spain. But how this all developed, we haven't spoken about this one at all, actually. How this all developed, 711, I think we mentioned it last time, 711, the Berber Tariq bin Ziyad, and I do stress the word Berber. He was a Berber, he was not an Arab. As we mentioned already in the last episode, the Berbers were the ones who were actually the indigenous people of North Africa. And they accepted Islam en masse. By 705, the whole Berber nation was Muslim. And Tariq bin Ziyad, the general Tariq bin Ziyad, was the general who set foot in Gibraltar, which is called Gibraltar because of being the mountain of Tariq, Jibr al-Tariq. So the Arabic word for mountain, Jibr al-Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. And indeed, Gibraltar is nothing else but a rock, which belongs nowadays as part of the British, shall we say empire? Is it still correct to say Commonwealth? Commonwealth. There are more countries. Okay, but okay, Gibraltar is still, it's actually Britain when you go to Gibraltar. They pay in pounds, you know that, right? They pay in pounds, right? They have the red telephone boxes outside there. They have the double-decker buses, all this stuff. So They drive on the other side. They drive on the wrong side, as we Europeans say. You know, they drive on the wrong side of the road.
Do they drink tea and watch cricket?
Yes, they do. They have tea time, yes. And they speak English, many of them at least. So, indeed, Gibraltar is one of the reminders of the British Empire, still there. And it has a big Islamic center, mashallah. Still a lot of Muslims around in Gibraltar, but many of them are immigrants. It's not the original Muslims from that time.
Right, no.
Now, 7/11, Tariq bin Ziyad, within 2 years, and I want everybody to listen carefully, within 2 years, the whole of Spain became Muslim. Now, a very small part in the north of Spain, which is nowadays called Galicia, did not become part of the Muslim Empire. That's where the Christian kings and emperors went all the way to hide in the very north of Spain, Galicia, and they had established their own kingdom, Christian kingdom up in the north, and were hoping the whole time through to finally reconquer, reconquista as they say, reconquer basically Spain back to the way it was before. But we should not forget all this. I mean, 2 years. Yeah, we didn't have trains and cars and planes at that time. 2 years. If you look at the Iberian Peninsula, it's not a small area. And within 2 years, being able to conquer this whole place, how was this possible? With, you know how many people went there? By the way, Tariq bin Ziyad went there with 12,000 people. 12,000 people was not a really big army.
No.
Okay? They had to cross the Straits of Gibraltar, arrive somewhere in Spain, in Gibraltar, arriving in Gibraltar, in nowadays Spain. And within 2 years, 12,000 people conquered the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, meaning Portugal and Spain as a whole. How this happened, you might ask now, and I'm asking it for you, because I see already how you would like to ask me this question. How is this possible, man? Within 2 years, 12,000 people just... What happened? Very simple. I mean, this is a very good example for what we were talking about the last 2 episodes, that Christians and Jews, who were a big part of the Iberian Peninsula at that time, they joined the Muslims. Not necessarily they all accepted Islam,
allies.
But they joined. Yes, they joined the Muslims against the Germanic, Visigoths. Actually, at that time they were the ones who were ruling Spain at that time, and they joined them because they saw the Visigoths, the Germanic tribe that was actually ruling the Iberian Peninsula, as rather as invaders than the Muslims. I mean, incredibly enough, isn't it, that the African Muslims came over to Spain and were rather welcomed by the indigenous people, more welcomed than the Germanic European tribes, because they were quite suppressive. And again, a very important point for Islam again here, that many Christians, many Jews accepted Islam. Islam becomes European. Suddenly Islam is a part of Spain, of the Iberian Peninsula, no doubt about it. And it's not just the Arabs and Berbers who came. In the contrary, as we said, most of the army that went over to Spain were actually not Arabs, but they were Berbers, but they were Arab speakers, of course, because Arabic was the main language, as we said, is the main language of Islam, or the Muslims, right?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the Spaniards did not call them Árabes or Musulmanes, which would be the correct word for Muslims in Spanish or for Arabs, but they called them Moros. Moros is nothing else but what they call nowadays, they try to actually use it in English also to call them Moors. Moors is nothing else but the Greek original word Mavros, which means black. Black. Moros is nothing else but the word black. So they called them black people because we should not forget, as we said, Berbers, were the original indigenous people of Africa. Many of them were darker than the Spaniards and than the Germanic tribes that were living in Spain, without a doubt. So out of dark they became black. Many of them were also black because there was no racial distinction in the Muslim Empire. It didn't really matter, as we know from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. About Bilal. We know about the development of racial prejudice, which basically, in the end, as we know in Islam, there is no racial prejudice.
No, of course not. Everything's equal. Everybody's equal.
So for that reason, you would have within the 12,000, you would have black people, African black people. You would have darker people, and you would also have lighter Arab-looking people.
In fact, even with the Romans around this time as well.
Correct.
They were one of the first multicultural societies.
One of the first, yes. One of the first, indeed. Indeed, the Romans also was a kind of multicultural society, but not in the way that the Islam, the Muslims did it, because the Romans, again, as the word says, there was an ethnic kind of entity, whereas the Muslims saw themselves as Muslims. There was no African, Arab, Turkish, whatever, but it was more well, they would identify themselves with Islam rather with a regional aspect or something like the Romans would rather do. So yes, indeed. So from Africa to Europe, basically, the 711 Islam spread within 2 years, and by 720, the whole of the Iberian Peninsula was conquered. As we said, except the very, very small northern part, where the Christian kings went to hide, basically, and from there on, they tried to do the Reconquista. And they indeed managed, after 700 years, to reconquer. I don't like using this word, because 700 years, I mean, I would like you to trace back 700 years, your ancestors, Daniel. Try to find out. Well, I don't think it's, yeah, exactly. So basically, 700 years for them, the whole time it was a conquered territory by the Arabs, right, for 700 years. So everybody who was there basically was an Arab. Every Muslim was an Arab, right? I mean, that's obviously nonsense. Obviously, we cannot think like this. It's impossible, because I would like to know how many years now, even if we look back into British history and we look into migration, 1960s, 70s, most of the Asian Muslims who live in this country, in the UK, came in the 60s, 70s from countries like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and they have been ever since the 60s here now. This is like 40, 50 years later, and they're integrated British citizens with British passport, as you are, Daniel, right? You have a British passport, correct?
Yeah.
So you're a British citizen. Would you now say, look at this, just 40, 50 years, would you now say you're not British? You are British as somebody can be. And your children are even more British. So imagine 700 years later, somebody comes back and tell your children, listen, actually, you're not British, because 700 years ago, your answer, what is that? So what kind of argument is that? So basically, Islam becomes an integral part of Spanish society. We have even scientists who are Spanish Muslims, clearly Spanish Muslims, and Europe becomes, or Spain becomes, the Iberian Peninsula becomes a Muslim country. Now, the Muslims managed to actually go into France nowadays. A very important part to mention here as well, that the Muslim armies mentioned to get into France up to Narbonne, nowadays present-day Narbonne. Again, we don't have a map to show our listeners. I hope the listeners will be able to take a map while they're listening to us. Or after that, take a look at southern France up to the area of Narbonne, to the area of Poitiers. Tours-en-Poitiers is not really far from Paris, 150, 160 kilometers. So imagine how the Christian armies were actually shivering that time already. They had the Muslims very close to Paris, not far from, actually in Europe, within Europe, no doubt about it, settled and established already in centers like Cordoba in Spain, in Granada, in Seville. So now we have them in France, the Muslims, and that, of course, was an issue for the Christian army. So what happens then is Charles Martel, the king of the Franks, or the French, beats that's the official story of this incident. He beats the Muslims, well, I'm just quoting you now again, historians, Western historians, the Arab Muslims at Poitiers. Now, that's the official version, that the official version says that the Charles Martel was the one who could push the Islamic invasion, back. The unofficial version, as far as I have read sources and know about, was that basically some lost Muslim rebels, went up to Tours-en-Poitiers and had to face a massive army of Christians. It was not a Muslim army they had to face, but some rebels, and they pushed it so much up to an incident for the Christian world, of course. Wow, Charles Martel, he was our big hero. He pushed the Muslims back out of Europe. And you know what? I've read so many sources about it, of course, it's not something that you will see everywhere, and it's not something that will be advertised big times there. But I start believing it myself. I think really that the Muslim army did not go that far, because we should not forget the climate also. I mean, Spain still, in Spain, especially in the south of Spain and Portugal, you still have, even in winter, a milder climate. Going into France, close to Paris, I mean, even in August in Paris, it's not really the best of weathers. The climate is not something for somebody coming from the desert. For people like the Berbers especially, wanting to settle somewhere in a climate like rain every day, and basically a climate which they're not used to, and it's too cold for them. So again, this is something that I read again in certain sources, that they believe, that there are historians out there who believe that because of that reason, they don't believe that the Muslim army went up there. They were not interested in staying up there. Yes.
But could we not question that perhaps it would have been good for establishing more land for themselves?
Well, yes, there's one theory going around, which I think is, I don't believe in it at all, but there's a theory going around that they were saying that the Muslims wanted to actually conquer Constantinople from the west, which, sorry, but if you look at Europe, if you look at where Spain is, and if you look where Constantinople is, Byzantium, now there's Turkey, Istanbul, Greece, I mean, we are talking about thousands of miles, having to cross the whole of Europe. Again, with that weather, having to go to Constantinople, I don't believe that theory is right. I think really is a very weak theory. I think this one, and one important point: the Muslims did not go to Spain to conquer Spain because they were interested in Europe. There was nothing to get in Europe that time. That time, civilization was in Asia and in Africa. There was no civilization in Europe, honestly now, okay? And if we believe the Darwin's theory, we expect Muslim Europeans to actually live on trees that time. So, if we believe Darwin's theory. So, that time, Europe was not a place that a civilized nation like the Muslims would love to conquer. Okay, let's now be fair and honest, because the Europeans like to put it like, oh, they came to conquer us. Yeah, guys, there was nothing to get from us here. There was nothing to get from the Europeans that time. So, the theory that's going around again is that one of the kings of Spain, King Roderick, who was the king of Spain at that time, one of his brothers was the ruler of North Africa, which was actually Ceuta at that time, Ceuta, Melilla, which is nowadays still Spanish, by the way, Ceuta, Melilla, two enclaves in Morocco. So Ceuta was basically at that time Spanish, and he wanted to basically get the throne in Spain from his brother. Okay? So he supported the Muslims in going to Spain. Actually, I even heard that he wanted to give them, once they had conquered Spain, give them the North African enclave which he was ruling, to have them, because that's what they wanted. They wanted the whole of Africa. They didn't want Spain. And he wanted Spain. He wanted the throne of his brother. So, which I have looked up, and indeed you will be able to find this theory in many sources as well. So, which to me sounds very plausible, because if you understand, again, there was nothing to get in Spain for the Muslims. There was nothing to do in Europe that time. Europe was very low in civilization that time. So yeah, that sounds to me very plausible.
What about Roderick, though? What was he? How was he seen, in fact, by the Muslims?
Well, okay. Again, it's very difficult. As we said, history is biased, but it's very difficult to
I've heard numerous things
exact. Well, exactly. There are quite some. Yeah. Okay. Well, during the time that the Muslims arrived in Spain, he was not there. Well, during the time that they arrived in Gibraltar, in the south of Spain, he was in the north. He was not there to defeat it, to protect it, to defeat the Muslims. How the Muslims viewed him, some of the sources say that they did have some kind of respect for him as a king. I mean, that's a normal thing. I mean, he's an emperor. He's a ruler of a country, so there's some respect. But on the other hand, again, if you compare Islamic civilization at the time to European civilization, where we will see later, it was an anathema for a Christian ruler to take a shower, to bath. Washing yourself, Europe that time, was something that you would not do because the Muslims did that. There was a sign when the Spaniards reconquered, so-called Reconquista, when they reconquered so-called Spain back, one of the signs to find out if somebody was still a Muslim was to see him washing. Because we would obviously perform as Muslims. We do 5 times a day, with the wudu, and then the hammams were widespread in Spain. Nowadays, there are even hammams from that time. They call them Turkish baths in English, right? So imagine imagine that Europeans at that time did not consider hygiene as part of their European being. So I find this amazing, I think. And the same also later when Sicily got reconquered, let's use this word again, by one of the Norman kings. He was seen bathing and washing himself too much, too often. So that people, especially the clerics around him, the Christian church people, would gather around him and advise him not to do it too often, because that's something the Muslims do. Again, a rumor was going around that actually the Norman king was Muslim or had accepted Islam, but would of course not come out of it because he would obviously rule a Christian country, and had kept actually a lot of Muslims at his court as advisors. So all this stuff, mashallah, I mean, it is extremely interesting. Really, it's extremely interesting, and I really hope that our listeners can have the chance and will have the chance to grab a book now and to go deeper into it and just find out more, because we cannot in 1 hour, of course, talk about everything. But it is a very, very important part of our history. It's a very important part of world history, not of our history, only world history. But yeah, there we come towards the end of our first part, and inshallah, we will go more into the history of Islam in Europe and the Mediterranean, and inshallah we will go back to it from the second part on, inshallah.
Welcome back to Islam Through the Ages with Dr. Stef Keris and myself, Daniel Raza. Just before the break, we were talking a little bit about how the Muslims settled in parts of Europe, such as, we refer to them as Spain and Portugal nowadays, but of course at the time, Al-Andalus. But Dr. Stef Keris, tell us a little bit, what was life like for Muslims there at the time? What was the actual culture? What was it like to live in Al-Andalus?
Jazakallah khair. Excellent, really a very good question indeed, because we did speak very general. We had a very general idea, or we got a very general idea of what happened in the Mediterranean Sea, especially. Mentioned Spain, Portugal, as you said. We mentioned France even, right? We mentioned that the Muslims had actually arrived up to Tours-en-Poitiers, which is 150 kilometers from Paris. We mentioned also the island of Sicily, part of Italy nowadays, Cyprus, Crete, Rhodes. But how was it to live, not only as a Muslim, but how was this Islamic caliphate actually in these parts of the world, in Europe? Now, I have a quote here, which is wonderful, actually, and I would like to just read it out to you. This is actually a European source, taken out of a European source, and it says the following about Sicily, which can be taken over to Spain and to Crete and Rhodes, all the same more or less. So the new Muslim rulers initiated land reforms, which in turn increased productivity and encouraged the growth of small holdings, and then to the dominance of the landed estates. The Arabs further improved irrigation systems and items such as oranges, lemons, pistachio and sugarcane. They were all introduced to Sicily. A description of Palermo, the capital, was given by Ibn Hawqal, a Baghdad merchant who visited Sicily in 950. A walled suburb called the Qasr, the palace, is the center of Palermo until today, with a great Friday mosque on the side of the later Roman cathedral. The suburb of Al-Khalisa contained the Sultan's palace, baths, a mosque, government offices and a private prison. Ibn Hawqal reckoned 7,000 individual butchers trading in 150 shops. By 1050, Palermo had a population of 350,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in Europe, second only to Islamic Spain's capital, Córdoba, which had a population of 450,000. In contrast, under the succeeding Christian kingdom of Sicily, Palermo's population had dropped to 150,000, though it became the largest city in Europe due to the larger decline in Cordoba's population. By 1330, Palermo's population had declined to 51,000. I want you to remember 1330, the Muslims were not there anymore. So it was basically run by Norman kings, it was run by the Christian kings. Now what happened when the Muslims had to leave Sicily? In that case, as we just read, that basically Sicily declined. And the Christian powers that took over did not take care of the island as the Muslims did before. The same happened in Spain, actually. If you look at Spain, okay, you can say, but hey, In the 1500s, what happens? 1492, the so-called discovery of America. The Spaniards could go out, colonize America, and so on. Yes, but all this happened, as we said before, because of Muslim rule before. The compass was invented by the Muslims. Without the compass, it would have never ended up there. They even thought that they were, as we know, Christopher Columbus thought that he was in India. So, so basically,
West Indies now.
Yes, exactly. That's why it's called West Indies, right? That's why the Native Americans, the real Americans, are called Indians instead of being called Americans. Actually, what they are. And he had, again, this is proven. He had Muslims on board with him to direct him, to guide him over there. Yes. So basically, when Granada, the last Muslim city in 1492 in Spain, when it fell, and the Christians took power, what do you think happened, Daniel? What happened after that? I mean, how did the Christians react on the Muslims? What happened after that? Let's say Andalusia, Spain became Christian. What then?
Well, I assume there would be a lot of resistance, for one. I think there'd be a lot of people not so happy with the decision. Was there a decline in the culture? Was there a lot of things becoming missing, so to speak?
Well, yes. The first thing, actually, the main thing that I wanted to hear was that after that, yes, there was a kind of resistance, but, the Muslims were very tired. What happened in Spain, what happened in Sicily also, is that they got, the whole of Spain got splintered into many smaller kingdoms. Okay, and not only Spain, Al-Andalus got splintered into many kingdoms, the same Sicily, the same actually all over the Muslim world. They fought each other so that the Christians from outside had easily access to it, and they could, of course, support the one, against the other Muslim, the one Muslim against the other Muslim leader. So that's how, basically, within themselves, Spain, especially in Al-Andalus, that's what happened. But 700 years is a really long time. 700 years, once also an empire, it cannot always stay up there.
We've seen all the empires have managed to basically see an end.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, exactly. That was it, But we have to also see why it happened. We have to see that it was within themselves that lost their Islamic kind of attitude towards themselves, obviously killing each other and wanting to rule this kingdom rather than the other one, or putting it together, or whatever, so many things. And not only in Spain, but all over the Muslim world. That happened all over the Muslim world. These smaller kingdoms were called taifas. Okay, taifas, Taifa, and they're actually known, the Taifa kingdom is known of being, the fragment, the splintering of Al-Andalus. Like this, the Christian kingdoms grew larger and stronger, and the balance of power shifted against the Taifa kingdoms. So the last Muslim kingdom of Granada in the south fell to Christian conquerors in 1492, the year that so-called America was discovered, right? 1492 by Christopher Columbus. In 1499, the remaining Muslim inhabitants were ordered to convert or to leave. At the same time, the Jews were expelled. Poorer Muslims, the so-called Moriscos, who could not afford to leave, ended up converting to Catholic Christianity and hiding their Muslim practices, hiding from the Spanish Inquisition until their presence was finally extinguished. Now, you asked me before, and maybe you should do the same. You ask the same question now for our listeners in general to hear that what happened to the Muslims? How come that there are no Muslims in Spain anymore? How come there are no Muslims in Portugal anymore, in Sicily and so on? That's what happened, basically. They were expelled. As soon as the Christian kings, the Queen Isabella took over, they had to decide either they leave as Muslims, and many of them did leave and went to Morocco or to other parts of the Muslim world, at that time the Ottoman Empire, or they had to stay and convert. And in order for the Spanish Christians that time to make sure that indeed the converts are Christians, or at least they got rid of their Islamic roots, they made sure that it's known that in many shops, in bazaars or whatever, in marketplaces, the shop owners would have a piece of ham always there, inviting their guests to eat, making sure that if somebody was not 100% sure that he's a Christian, make sure that he is a Christian, give him some ham to eat. If he doesn't eat ham, make sure that the Inquisition, the people of the Inquisition, they will know. Yeah. So then, of course, there would be punishments, and there would they would, of course, reinforce their barbaric rule, I can clearly say, because 700 years we have had Muslims. We're not saying that 700 years everything was peace and honey and everything was fine. We're not saying that. But there were Christians and Jews working next to each other, with each other, living with each other, even intermarrying. I mean, there is no doubt about it that there were Muslim men marrying Christian women, and so on. So all this has happened.
There was no force. And I was speaking to you earlier on as well about this sort of tax that people may have heard of. What is the reality of this?
Well, yes, in an Islamic empire, it's always like this, that there is a certain jizya tax, okay, which belongs to, which is a tax for the dhimmis. These are the people basically who are Ahl Kitab, who belong to the non-Muslims, and they have to pay their tax as being non-Muslim. Why? Simply because they do not have to go to the army, so they need the army support to be protected living in the Islamic State. So, as an example, just, they do have their businesses, they do have their churches, they do have the synagogues, they have everything they have to have within an Islamic State. They even have their leaders. They even have the Christian leaders. And we have this also, we've had it also under the Ottoman Empire. If you look at Greece, for example, in Greece, it was very, very normal that the second in command after the Sultan was actually the bishop of the Greek Orthodox Church. So, this is nothing new, and this is again known, and that actually the bishop was actually the one who was ruling his Christian subjects, and the Sultan had him as his right hand. So definitely we're far away from forced conversions or something like this. Definitely. Again, we have incidents during the Ottoman Empire, and we will talk about it inshallah when we come to them, but we have incidents where there was a certain sultan, which we know according to sources from that time, who really disliked Christians. So that during his time, and I don't know how long his rule was, I don't remember his exact name anymore, but it was one of the sultans, and there are 36 rulers of the Ottoman Empire. So one of them, persecuted Christians. I don't know what he did exactly, how, whatever. That's something I'm still doing some research about, but I have heard about this, and this existed. And there was one out of 36 rulers. Okay? Now, if we take this one and make this as a rule for the Ottoman Empire, now this is unfair, isn't it? But okay, as we said, I mean, who is playing fairly nowadays? Everybody's trying to play their game. So the same actually in Al-Andalus, and we have also some nice quotes which I don't have now in front of me. But I remember one of the rulers of the clerics of the Catholic Church complained to officials during the time of Al-Andalus, saying basically that all our Spanish youth, they learn Arabic, they know how to converse in proper Arabic, but they don't know their own mother tongue. Meaning, if you wanted to go to universities, which by the way, one of the first universities in the world was established in Spain, in Cordoba. If you wanted to attend university and you wanted to learn, which was not exclusive just for Muslims, even the Christian subjects and Jewish subjects, they could learn, and they did learn, and there was a Jewish revival, by the way, at that time. They had to learn Arabic, obviously. Because it's like here. I mean, if I go to Britain to a school, obviously I'm not going to expect my lecturer to speak Greek, right? Yeah. So obviously, it's absolute normal. I mean,
do this whole show in Greek.
Well, obviously. So that's the way it was. So let's not underestimate what happened actually that time, and people do not see that. Again, the same in Sicily. There were Christians living there, and many Greek-speaking Christians, and during the time of the Byzantines, they welcomed, actually, they were happy that the Muslims came, because the Byzantines, as we said again, were quite suppressive in their rule. The same in Rhodes, the same in Crete. Crete and Rhodes, Greek islands in the south of Ireland. I just wanted to mention quickly also, that running a company, the Halal Choice, the halalchoice.com, we do actually do quite some tours, trips, to Greece, Cyprus, Spain, and we do take a look at the heritage, the Islamic legacy that was actually left behind. So whoever wants can take a look at it. It's the halalchoice.com, just to take a look at it, what we're doing actually. So these, what we're discussing here now, you can see there in front of you, and it's amazing. I mean, as I said before, Palermo was known as the city of minarets. How many minarets are there in Palermo nowadays? Daniel, what do you think?
Well, I'm sure that plenty of the history has been sort of put under a few covers. So I'm assuming there can't be that many, can't be as much.
Well, none. Not even one.
No?
There's not even one minaret in Palermo.
They've all been wiped out.
They don't exist anymore, yeah. They have all been taken care of.
It's surprising that, such areas, such famous areas, would actually try to bury so much of their history.
Well, surprising. It's, Europe is trying to create a European identity, especially with the European Union nowadays. Okay, they're trying to create a European identity where Islam and is a foreign body, as I mentioned before, and is not part of Europe. Although we should not forget, we do have Muslim countries within Europe.
Mm-hmm.
We have a country like Albania, 70% Muslims. Countries like Kosovo and Montenegro, majority Muslims. Bosnia is known, right? So we do have several Muslim countries. We have Turkey, which is part of Europe as well. Not part of the European Union, but it's part of Europe. Within the European Union, we have 25 to 30 million Muslims living in the European Union. So I don't think that's a small element here, what we're raising. I mean, this is something very, very important, I think. That's why, and especially after the Muslims had to leave Europe, left Europe, there was a kind of, let me see how what we can call it, a kind of Christianization type of thing, European Christianization type of thing, wanting to get rid of everything was Islamic, Arabic, whatever. Although 700 years in Spain, I mean, come on, 500 more years in Portugal, 500 and more years Ottoman Empire in Greece, Cyprus. So, I mean, we cannot just forget it. We cannot ignore that. And they played an important part for the Renaissance in Europe, by the way. Played an important part. We mentioned the Islamic State before in Cordoba. We mentioned also how it splintered, got into many smaller kingdoms. And we mentioned also that was something that from within, the Muslims themselves destroyed themselves, basically. And there was not a lot that needed. They just needed a lot push from outside. And the push from outside came from the Christian kingdoms from outside. Of course, as I mentioned before, in Spain.
Prey on the weaklings, basically.
That's right. They were hiding all in the north, in Galicia. And they could then easily just come down and basically... within no time, reconquer the Spain and the whole Iberian Peninsula. In France, we mentioned it before. France, they did not stay long in France, and there's not a lot that remained in France. I mean, not a lot remained in Sicily either, although they were there more than 150 years. But what I mean is, they did not have the chance to stay like they did in Spain, or in Sicily, or in Greece even, where they basically left monuments behind, left intellectual centers behind, mosques, of course, and all the stuff. Whereas in France, they met a tough resistance straight away, and they were pushed back from Toulouse by Eudes, the Duke of Aquitaine. This was basically the first defeat of the Muslims in France in 721. So if you remember 711, not even 10 years before they arrived in Spain, in 721, there was the first defeat in France. That's where they basically had to stop and they couldn't go on anymore. And that's what the French look upon as a very big victory for the Europeans against the Muslims.
Who were the sort of people that were living in France at the time?
Germanic. I mean, we have, okay.
Right, I know it probably wasn't France back then.
Well, as we said, yeah, of course, the borders of the countries at that time were not the borders that we know nowadays. It was not France as we know nowadays. I have to mention France because just to get an idea. But indeed, France was different at that time. So yeah, we did have a lot of Germanic, but also Romantic people from the Romance area, which means that's why the language it has nothing to do with feeling romantic, but that's where it comes from, because French is a Romance language. That means people who speak French, the language, French, Spanish, Italian, they all have roots with the Latin language, which comes from Rome. That's why we call it. So these people basically, they were tribal. They were very tribal, European tribes. Okay? And we mentioned also that in Spain there were Germanic people living there before. And there is an idea that most probably the name Al-Andalus that was given by the Muslims to that area, it comes from one of the Germanic tribe that was actually ruling in Spain, which was actually the Vandals, which is a Germanic tribe. Again.
Land of the Vandals.
Land of the Vandals, right. So there is an idea that most probably that's where the name Andalus came from. But there are many hypotheses behind this one. We don't know exactly what the truth is, but that's just one of the things that I'm mentioning here now. again, an important point to see is, as we said before, these Moors, and we mentioned why they were called Moors. You remember, Daniel?
Moors.
Got you there, right?
Yeah, you got me there.
The Spanish people called the Muslims from Africa Moors.
Because they were foreigners?
Well, not foreigners. What is Moors? It comes from the Greek word mavros, which means black. So they were darker people. Right, they were darker people.
That was it, yeah.
That's it, right? So they were darker people, basically, and they gave them the name of they look black people, basically. That's all they could name them. Nowadays, they like using this name, even in English, simply because they do not want to use the name Muslim. Because nowadays, we all work in nation states. We all, they would like to call them Arabs, but they were not Arabs. Right?
No,
many of them were Berbers, as we said before. Yeah. So calling them Arabs would actually change history as it is. So instead of calling them Arabs, calling them Muslims goes against our scheme of thinking nowadays. In Europe, we have nation states. So, okay, they were Muslims, but where were they from? Well, they came from the Muslim world. So Muslim world, what? Mainly from nowadays North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, this area, North African area, and many of them were black indeed. So nowadays, as many Spaniards do it nowadays, they see another Reconquista. They say there is another Reconquista the other way around. Nowadays, they see Muslims coming from Africa, Moroccans and poorer immigrants coming into Spain and Portugal, mainly Spain, to go to Europe, basically, and to find work or to find a better, to build up a better life. And they call it, ironically, another Reconquista from the Muslims nowadays. It's ironic, how things change. Spain was nothing else but it developed with the Muslims. After the Muslims left, Spain became a superpower, became a colonial power, and then it came to the point where it is nowadays. It is one of the poorer Mediterranean countries, southern European countries. There's not a lot of might and power behind it anymore, but because they are part of the European Union, they obviously consider themselves being better than the poor Africans coming from down up, But if we look at history, then you look at things in a different way, I think. The same, the Greeks, actually, if you look at the Greeks used also to be 500 years part of the Ottoman Empire. And they're looking down on their Muslim neighbors, the Turks or Kurds, who passed the border to come to Europe. But again, if you look at history, 500 years of Ottoman Empire, Greece was just a small part of the Ottoman Empire, not important at all, and the Greeks did not play a big role there. They were, let me just do the Greeks right here now, because the role that they played was they were businessmen, they were tradesmen, they were merchants. Many of them were leading the fleet, the Turkish fleet, the Ottoman fleet, no doubt about it. Important people during the Ottoman Empire. But Greece was not a country as it is nowadays, and it didn't play a role as it played nowadays. So it's like it's a revenge now, isn't it, that the Europeans have nowadays? Yes.
How was Greek culture seen by the Ottomans? Because, of course, we know a lot about Greek now. We know a lot about their philosophers, and we know a lot about, their architecture, and, in fact, a lot of their writing as well.
Okay, this is something for another episode, but a quick one, just to give you a quick answer to the question. Sultan Fatih, who was the one who opened, that's why it's called Fatih, who opened Istanbul, Constantinople, to Islam, who conquered Constantinople, when he went to Athens, he forbade his people to take any stone from the ancient buildings around, from the Acropolis, in order to build something, even building a mosque. And he even got upset on somebody, one of the generals who did it in the end, and actually hung him. So, because he respected ancient Greece so much, and respected the ancient Greek culture so much, that he did not want to destroy it, and he didn't, because the Acropolis, as we know, is still there, the Parthenon is still there, the Temple of the Parthenon, which used to be a mosque, by the way, during the time of the Ottomans, but we will speak about this one, inshallah, in the episode when it comes that far.
Okay. And
we do visit, by the way, Greece also with the halal choice, so we do visit it also, so whoever wants to take a look at the trips that we have. We do have this too, and we also take you to the Muslim monuments there to take a look at what has been left behind, because it is forgotten and hidden. And in Spain, as I said before, the Spaniards are a little bit more business-minded there in that way. So it's not that they are proud of the history. Some of them are, maybe. But in general, they just make money with this. So it's tourism, and they do make money with this, and that's good for them. That's about it. But they would not, again, Islamic history in Spain is so rich and big.
Yeah.
That before you go, I would really advise anybody to take a look at it, a closer look at Islamic history there, before you decide to make a move to go to Portugal or to Spain to look at the monuments that are still there, mashallah, which is beautiful to see. Muslims are present in Spain, especially. You will find still some Muslims, Spaniards who have come back to Islam because they've discovered that in their lineage, and when they go back to their great-great-great-great-parents, they will find out that they used to be Muslims, and they were the ones who stayed behind and accepted forcefully Christianity. And Daniel, as we have seen before, right, when the Muslims went into a country, did they force anybody to accept Islam?
Nope.
No. And this is not just me saying that, Daniel. This is not just me. This is not, you can obviously say, okay, Dr. Stef Keris said that, that's fine and nice. That could be my bias, my opinion, my subjective, my point. But if you look at sources around you, and non-Muslim sources will tell you exactly the same what I just said, and you will find enough evidence for that Muslims in general did not practice the forced conversion on people, simply because also it's impossible. How can you make somebody
of
Muslim?
Course, exactly.
Honestly, now
it's in our holy book.
It's impossible to make somebody Muslim. The practical part of it, you would have to really stand out of his house to see if he's going to the mosque. You would have to see if he's observing his prayers, because if he doesn't make salah, then forget him being Muslim, right? Yeah. That's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Yeah. So basically, how can you control that? So it's impossible to make somebody Muslim. Allah makes somebody Muslim, right? So it's impossible. So this never happened. This didn't happen in the way that it happened with the Christians. As soon as they came to Sicily, what happened? We have no Muslim element anymore in there. And as soon as they went back to the conquered Spain and Portugal, forced conversions, people had to flee. The Jews had to flee, and most of them found refuge where? In the Ottoman Empire. Again, with the Muslims. So subhanallah, this all gives you a general idea. I think, of course, we had to keep it general simply because it's just an hour. We can't really go into depth. But this gives you a general idea of Islam in Europe and the Mediterranean Sea especially. The Muslims managed to get the Iberian Peninsula as theirs for 700 years, going to France, Sicily, parts of Italy, Greece, Crete and Rhodes. And I find it an amazing part of history. And I'm happy to have the chance to share it with you, mashallah. Jazakumullah khair for listening to me, and I'll see you inshallah in the next episode.